Robert Cialdini spent 3 years working undercover inside the persuasion industry, and what he found should make you question every automatic yes you have ever said. This is Offline Connected, where we decode the books a young, hungry strategist actually reads. Finance, power, persuasion, psychology, the canon. We read them carefully so you can absorb the core in one focus session. What follows is our analysis of influence, what we believe the author is really saying, and how it might apply to your life. Find a quiet place, disconnect, and let's decode. Influence by Robert Cialdini was first published in 1984, and it has since sold over 5 million copies in dozens of languages, a reach that should tell you something about how hungry the world has been for this particular knowledge. We are covering the entire book, not a single chapter, through 3 ideas. The automatic trigger that runs your behavior before you have decided anything. The ancient weapon of reciprocation that engineers genuine obligation from a gesture that cost almost nothing. And the commitment trap that makes a single small yes the quiet foundation of a much larger one. Cialdini was not a theorist watching from a distance. Before writing this book, he spent roughly 3 years embedded inside the compliance professions, car dealerships, fundraising offices, advertising agencies, door-to-door sales organizations. He paid attention to what practitioners actually did, not what they claimed to do. What emerged across all those environments was a pattern. The same small set of moves, appearing in different industries, different cultures, different decades, producing the same compliant behavior in different people. He was not documenting trickery. He was documenting efficiency. The practitioners who deployed these moves most skillfully often could not articulate why they worked. They had learned through iteration what Cialdini would later explain through controlled research. The result, published in 1984, became one of the most widely read examinations of human behavior ever printed. The first idea is the one that organizes everything else in this book. Here it is plainly. Human beings are not slow, deliberate thinkers who occasionally take shortcuts. We are fast, automatic responders who occasionally slow down to deliberate. Cialdini's central claim is that for every major category of social behavior, giving, agreeing, buying, obeying, trusting, there's a trigger, a specific cue in the environment that, when present, fires a behavioral program before your conscious mind has entered the picture. He calls this the click-whirr response, borrowing language from ethologists who study fixed action patterns in animals. The stimulus arrives. The program clicks on. The behavior wears out. And that whole sequence can complete before you have formed a single deliberate thought about what is happening. The mechanism is ancient. The mechanism is efficient. And the mechanism can be deliberately operated by anyone who knows where to find the switch. Cialdini opens the book with an experiment involving a mother turkey and a stuffed polecat. A polecat is a natural predator, one the turkey will attack on sight. But her entire mothering response is governed by a single cue, the cheep-cheep sound her chicks produce. Attach a miniature recorder playing that sound to the stuffed polecat, and the turkey cradles it, defends it, warms it as though it were her own living chick. Remove the sound, and she attacks her actual chick without hesitation. She is not foolish. She is efficient. In every natural environment turkeys evolved in, that sound virtually always meant a living chick was present. The shortcut served her across countless interactions, until someone exploited it in a laboratory. Cialdini's argument is that humans run the same kind of programs, and ours govern decisions that matter enormously more than nest tending. A white coat produces deference to medical authority without a single credential check. A high price produces an assumption of quality before a single feature is evaluated. A scarcity signal produces urgency before a single alternative is considered. A face resembling someone trusted produces trust, full stop. None of these shortcuts are irrational in the environments that shape them. They are accurate statistical summaries, carrying forward across generations because they were correct the vast majority of the time. What we did not inherit is any mechanism that updates when the environment changes or when the cheap is coming from something that wants to exploit us rather than something that genuinely is our chick. But here is where it gets interesting. The operators who press these triggers most effectively are usually not doing so with full conscious intent. They learned what produced compliance and kept doing it. The science arrived later. That is, in some ways, the most unsettling part of the entire book. Cialdini writes, automatic, stereotyped behavior is prevalent in much of human action because in many cases it is the most efficient form of behaving. The key word is not gullible. It is efficient. That reframe carries more weight than it first appears to. Here is where this lands for you specifically. Think of the last decision you made that felt obvious, a yes that came quickly, a no that arrived without deliberation, and then consider what cue preceded it. Someone you respected had made the same choice. The supply was visibly limited. The price was high enough to imply quality. An authority figure vouched for it. Someone had done something for you first. If any of those were present, you did not make a deliberate decision. You completed a program that was started from outside. That is not a moral failing. It is a description of how human cognition handles the genuine impossibility of analyzing everything from first principles under real-world time pressure. The shortcuts are not the enemy. They're the architecture. But Cialdini's quiet question, the one this book asks on every single page, is whether you want to know which of your shortcuts have already been found, cataloged, and used against you without your awareness. So the first idea is this. Beneath the surface of every social interaction, beneath the words, the stated intentions, the visible logic, there's a layer of triggers, each capable of producing behavior before you have consciously chosen anything. Cialdini spent years cataloging 6 of them. The book you're decoding is that catalog. And the most important thing to understand before we move forward is that knowing the catalog does not immunize you. You can read this book, understand the mechanism with perfect clarity, and still feel the pull when a scarcity countdown runs out. Still feel your resistance lower when an authority figure speaks. Still feel the obligation settle in after an unsolicited favor lands in your hands. Knowledge gives you perhaps a fraction of a second to notice the program firing before it completes. The actual rewiring of those responses is a different project entirely, one that takes far longer. What this book gives you is the awareness that the programs exist and the ability to name what is happening to you while it is happening. That fraction of a second is the entire margin. The second idea is the one Cialdini calls reciprocation, and it may be the oldest compliance mechanism in human history. The principle sounds deceptively simple. If someone gives you something, you feel obligated to give something back. But the mechanism is stranger and more powerful than any simple summary can capture. Reciprocation does not merely create a preference for returning favors. It creates an active psychological discomfort, something close to dead anxiety, that most people will go to considerable lengths to relieve. The discomfort of feeling indebted to someone is, for most people across most cultures, genuinely worse than the cost of whatever they give in return to resolve it. Which means the original gift does not need to equal the return gift in value. It simply needs to trigger the program. And this asymmetry, where a small gift reliably produces a disproportionately large return, is precisely where the exploitation lives. The rule applies. Cialdini is careful to note, even at gifts you did not ask for and do not want. The program runs regardless of desire. Cialdini describes the strategy the Hare Krishna Society deployed in airports during the 1970s. Members had discovered that if they gave a passerby a small gift, a flower, a book, before asking for a donation, the rate of giving increased dramatically. The passerby had not requested the gift. Many of them did not want the gift. A significant number walked directly to the nearest trash can as soon as the interaction ended, but they still donated. The discomfort of exiting the exchange without reciprocating was more than the cost of $1 or $5. What made this finding particularly striking was that the tactic worked even when people recognized it as a manipulation. Knowing you're being played does not automatically disengage the reciprocation program. The rule runs deeper than the critique, and this is the part nobody wants to hear. The same mechanism operates in domains most people consider too sophisticated for this kind of influence. Free samples in grocery stores produce purchasing behavior with almost no relationship to actual product preference. Unsolicited favors in professional relationships create obligation that shapes negotiations years later. In context, the person who gave the favor has long since forgotten. Political donors find that the legislators whose campaigns they have funded are measurably more likely to support their interests, not through any overt arrangement, but because the reciprocation program runs at every level of human organization without exception. Cialdini documents societies across multiple continents where reciprocation norms are so deeply embedded that individuals have financially ruined themselves returning gifts they never requested. Not because they were generous, but because the alternative being identified as someone who does not reciprocate threatened something they valued more than money. They're standing inside the social fabric they depended on. Cialdini writes, "The rule for reciprocation is so deeply ingrained that it can produce obligation to strangers, to uninvited gifts, and to gifts we actively dislike." The word uninvited is doing the heaviest lifting in that sentence. Consider the last time someone did something for you without being asked, and you later found yourself agreeing to something you would otherwise have declined, not because you were pressured, but because the alternative was carrying that sense of unresolved debt into every subsequent interaction with that person, and the weight of it was worse than the cost of saying yes. That feeling is not rare. It is the invisible texture of most professional relationships. The people who understand this principle do not wait to be asked what they want. They give first without announcement, and they give in currencies that are difficult to return in kind: time, access, specialized knowledge, a favor that arrives at precisely the right moment. The obligation that follows is diffuse enough that you cannot point to it directly, but present enough to shape every decision you make in that relationship from that point forward. Cialdini's research finds that most people, when asked why they agreed to something, do not identify the prior gift as a factor. They tell themselves the idea was sound or the person was trustworthy. Both of those feelings were installed by the gift. They simply arrived late enough to feel like independent conclusions. Reciprocation is powerful enough to fill a book on its own. But what makes Cialdini's argument more than a catalog of isolated tactics is how he shows these principles operating together, each one preparing the ground for the next. Reciprocation lowers your guard. It creates the felt experience of relationship. It makes the person who gave first feel like an ally, and allies receive the benefit of the doubt on requests that strangers would not. Which means that when the next trigger fires, when that ally asks for a small commitment, you are already primed. The gift created the relationship. The relationship created goodwill. The goodwill made the small yes feel natural rather than coerced. And a small yes, as the third idea will demonstrate in considerable detail, has consequences that extend far beyond the moment it was given. The principles in this book are not a list. They are a sequence. And understanding the sequence is where the real literacy of this work begins. The third idea is commitment and consistency, and it is the one Cialdini describes as the most quietly devastating. Not because it is the most spectacular, but because it runs the longest. The principle: once a person has committed to a position, made a declaration, or taken even a small action aligned with a particular identity, They feel internally compelled to remain consistent with that commitment in every subsequent decision. The compulsion does not require external enforcement. The self is its own auditor, and it demands coherence between what you have shown yourself to be and what you do next. This means the most effective way to produce a large behavior in another person is not to ask for the large behavior directly. It is to first secure a small behavior, small enough that refusing feels unreasonable, small enough that agreeing feels almost inconsequential, and then let the self-consistency engine do the work of producing everything larger that follows. The key is not coercion. It is installation. The classic demonstration is what researchers call the foot in the door technique. In a study Cialdini describes in detail, researchers approach homeowners and ask them to place a large, genuinely imposing billboard in their front yard advocating for safe driving. The sign would have partially blocked the view from the house. Almost everyone refused. In a separate group, researchers first asked homeowners to place a small, 3-inch sign in their window, supporting the same cause. Most agreed. 2 weeks later, when this second group was approached for the large billboard, the majority said yes. They had become the kind of people who supported this cause. The small sign had quietly updated their self-concept, and the large billboard was simply an expression of who they had already declared themselves to be. Cialdini shows how this cascade moves across domains most people never think to connect. A salesperson who asks you to fill out your own order form, rather than completing it for you, dramatically increases the probability you keep the purchase afterward, because writing it yourself makes it feel like a decision rather than something that was sold to you. A commitment made in writing, even to yourself, even in a notebook no one else will ever read, exerts the same internal pressure as a public pledge, because the self is always present as an audience. Recruitment into organizations that begin with a small gesture of participation, attending a single meeting, accepting a single meal, and graduate requests incrementally until the participant cannot locate the moment the reasonable sequence became an unreasonable one. So what does that actually mean for you? The commitment does not need to be large to be binding. It does not even need to be fully conscious. A sentence written down, a word said to no one in particular, one action small enough to feel almost trivial that makes a specific identity feel like it fits. These are all a foot in the door. And once the door is open, it has no lock on the inside. Cialdini writes, once we have made a choice or taken a stand, we encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. The pressure is internal first. That is the detail that changes everything about how you read the principle. If there's a belief you have held for years about what you are capable of, about what kind of relationships you deserve, about what work is meant for someone like you, consider what small commitment first installed it. A single teacher's characterization that you accepted without argument. A first visible failure that you agreed, without stopping to examine the agreement, was evidence of permanent limitation. A moment when someone offered a description of who you were and you nodded, and then spent a decade making every subsequent decision consistent with that nod. That nod was the foot in the door. Every behavior that reinforced the belief afterward was the self-enforcing consistency. Not because the original characterization was accurate, but because you committed to it before you had the tools or the distance to challenge it. Cialdini's research makes an uncomfortable case. Much of what you call your personality is not something you discovered about yourself. It is a set of commitments made in small, almost accidental moments, defended ever since by a nervous system that prizes coherence over accuracy. The mechanism can be run in the other direction, towards something you chose deliberately, with full awareness of what you are installing. So these are the three ideas. The click-whirr response, which tells us that human behavior is more automatic than deliberate and more exploitable than we are comfortable admitting. Reciprocation, which tells us that an unsolicited gift is not generosity until proven otherwise. It is the opening move in an exchange your nervous system has already silently agreed to complete. And commitment and consistency, which tells us that the most durable form of influence is not coercion. It is the kind that gets you to choose something small and then lets your own identity enforce everything larger that follows without any further intervention required. None of these are tricks. They are descriptions of how the human operating system actually functions, refined over hundreds of thousands of years in environments where these shortcuts were nearly always correct. The gap between those environments and this one is not a design flaw. It is where every modern manipulation finds its foothold. Knowing the gap exists is the beginning of moving differently inside it. Consider a man we will call Marcus. He is a mid-level procurement manager at a technology company in the mid-2000s. He does not consider himself naive. He has negotiated contracts. He has sat across tables from salespeople and believed, with some evidence, that he could read them. One autumn, a vendor's account manager begins sending small, unrequested gifts to Marcus's team, branded notebooks, catered lunches, a book that arrives at exactly the moment the team is wrestling with the problem it addresses. Marcus is faintly annoyed by this, but says nothing. The gifts are too small to formally decline and too consistent to ignore. By the third month, Marcus describes the account manager to a colleague as someone his team has a genuine relationship with. He does not notice that every component of that felt relationship was constructed from gifts he never requested. When a vendor proposes a new contract, priced significantly higher than their current provider, with a longer lock-in period, Marcus argues for it internally. He tells himself it is because the product is technically superior. He tells himself he has done his diligence. But when a skeptical colleague asks for the specific technical comparison that justifies the price premium, Marcus cannot produce one. What he has is a conviction. And underneath the conviction, invisible even to him, is an obligation he has never named and a commitment to a relationship he has never consciously chosen. He signs the contract. 3 of Cialdini's principles are operating simultaneously and without any awareness on Marcus's part. The gifts installed reciprocation, the felt sense of debt that requires resolution. The warmth of the ongoing relationship installed liking. The heuristic that tells you to say yes to people you feel connected to. And Marcus's internal declaration that this was a real relationship installed commitment and consistency, which ensured that every subsequent decision defended that identity rather than questioned it. Marcus is not being coerced. He is being guided through a sequence that his own nervous system is completing on his behalf, on schedule, without friction. He never agreed to be influenced. He agreed to lunch, and then he kept being consistent with the person who agreed to lunch. This is not a story about a weak man. It is a story about a normal one. And in Cialdini's 3 years of field work, some version of this story appeared in every industry he studied, at every level of organizational hierarchy, on every continent he examined. Of the 3 ideas in this book, the one that most rewards immediate action is commitment and consistency, not because it is the most alarming, but because it is the one you can deliberately aim inward in the direction you actually want to go. Here is the specific action. Before this week ends, write one sentence. 1. On paper, not in a notes application, describing a concrete behavior you will perform in the next 72 hours. Not a goal, not a resolution, a behavior. Something specific enough that you will know with certainty whether you did it or did not. Then pay attention to what your nervous system does with that sentence. Watch how uncomfortable it becomes to leave it unacted upon. Watch how it begins generating reasons why the action is correct, why it fits the kind of person you are, why ignoring it would represent a betrayal of something you value. You have not added willpower. You have installed a program. And Cialdini's research suggests your nervous system treats a written commitment with the same gravity it treats a public pledge. because the self is always present as an audience, whether anyone else is watching or not. Understanding reciprocation gives you the ability to notice when someone is manufacturing obligation and to decide, consciously, whether you want to honor it or name it and set it aside. Understanding the click-whirr response makes you a more deliberate reader of every influence attempt in your environment. But the commitment principle is the one you can work with rather than against, installing a small identity and letting consistency do the labor that willpower usually burns out trying to sustain. And if you want to understand how these principles operate at the environmental level, how the space surrounding a request is shaped before the first word of persuasion is spoken, the next book in this series answers exactly that question. We open with a man who spent 3 years working inside the persuasion industry and came back with a catalog of the triggers that run human behavior below the threshold of conscious choice. The answer to what he found is not cynicism, not a worldview where everyone around you is systematically plotting to exploit your nervous system. Most people pressing these triggers do not know they are pressing triggers. They learned what produced compliance and kept doing it. The science arrived later. The dangerous ones are the minority who found the catalog first and read it carefully. What this book offers is the same catalog, and with it the ability to catch yourself mid-click-whirr and ask the question almost no one in that moment thinks to ask. Is this a decision I'm making or a program that was started from the outside? That question, raised at the right moment, is worth the entire book. Raised consistently, it changes how you move through every negotiation, every purchase, every relationship where someone else might have arrived better prepared than you. The next decode is Persuasion, also by Cialdini, which asks an even more unsettling question. What if the most powerful moment of influence is not the ask itself, but the 60 seconds that precede it? What if agreement is manufactured before you're even aware that a conversation has begun? One question for you in the comments. Of the 6 principles Cialdini identifies, reciprocation, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity, which one has shaped a significant decision in your life that you only recognized as influence long after the fact?